how did you discover Kambo?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I have been interested in peptides for a long time. I have used injectable peptides prior to learning about Kambo. And so I already had a powerful belief or a powerful understanding of them and a deep experience myself of understanding how they could help with the body, telling, teaching the body, not teaching, but guiding the body to begin healing, right? So I came to it with that foundation. I was actually at an ayahuasca retreat, and one of the girls looks at me. She was starting a med spa, and she was like, "Oh, you like peptides? You should totally look at Kambo. It's full of peptides." And I was like, "What? You mean a frog secretion has peptides?" Well, little did I know that like most of the research on peptides is done on frog secretions. But I was like, "Oh well, I've got to check this out." So I got back to the States, and the first time I just was like, let me Google, let me look around. Let me try this because I totally will just try I will try a lot of things. Just I love experiences. And so I was like, well, let me check this out. So I did it the first time. And I had the great fortune of sitting with a tribal detox trained practitioner. And on the side of her table, I saw a book, a Dr. William Seed's peptide book. And I was like, oh, you like take this seriously. And so my first experience was interesting, right? Your body goes through this really wild roller coaster of physical experience. And I felt okay afterwards. But then a few months later, one of my conditions is celiac. And I ended up exposed to gluten twice in a week. And I was so sick. I cannot explain, especially for me, it ends up becoming like a GI piece, but then it becomes an entire existence piece where I hurt all over. I am beyond exhausted. I have severe brain fog. And this was 2 months later. I just was spiraling out of control. And I couldn't quite figure out how to bring myself back together. And I remember sitting there when I was like, I should try that combo thing. So I reached back out and ended up having to sit with another practitioner. But I did 3 days in a row, and I went from barely able to function to bouncing off the walls. And I was just like, oh my God, I feel so good. Everybody should feel this good. I've got to learn more about this. And not long after that, I was headed to Creed, Colorado to learn from Jason Fellows at Tribal Detox.
My God.
It was so powerful, so powerful.
So yeah, let's talk about this. And then we'll get into all of your work because I'm curious how fatigue could be helped with combo or because that was my experience too, is like when I was at a really just like a low point physically, energetically, tired, like couldn't function. And honestly, there were a few of us that got sick on coming home from a dieta in Peru. And it was just like there was this feeling of like, I need to hit a reset button. And someone was like, you should really do combo for that. And it was amazing. And I did the 3 sessions in a moon cycle, but it just kind of healed it instantly. And I hate to say that, right? But there's a lot of people, especially where I live in Lyme country, there's a lot of people that do swear by it. But like from a scientific standpoint, or at least the signs that like what do we know about combo? Like, how does it even work? Like you just said, there's peptide research using frogs. I had no idea. Wow.
Right. Yeah, combo is really interesting. And we have to remember that it is a really complex secretion. So whenever I'm injecting myself or working with peptides, whether it's a pill or an injection, it is a single peptide that has a host of benefits to the body, and it influences their peptide receptors all over the place, right? So let me actually step back a little bit. What is a peptide? A
Yeah, right.
peptide. So a peptide is a short chain of amino acids. So long chains make up proteins, and then short chains make up peptides. And how many amino acids? So that would be like glycine and lysine and cysteine and all these ene words you might have heard of. They're all amino acids. They are all linked. They link up together, and however they do that creates a peptide or protein if it's long. And so we have around, I think the number last I heard was like, I think they think there's like 6,000 different peptides that our body makes and has receptors for. And To sort of put this into perspective, I always like to use oxytocin as an example, right? So we know of oxytocin as like the snuggle hormone, the love hormone, right? It creates an emotional experience of openness and community and love. But that exact same hormone is actually what causes contraction of the uterus during labor. It's the same hormone that causes milk letdown when a mom is going to feed her baby. So we can have peptides that have effects on both, the neurologic system and the emotional experience, as well as the physical body. So now imagine Kambo, which has 27 different bioactive peptides in it.
And that's
So
like proven or
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. They've brought back samples. It was originally looked under a microscope in the 80s by Dr. Vittorio Erspemer, who looked at it under a microscope and and he actually has done a ton of research on peptides in general. I have a picture of him with like pictures of frogs in the background. He clearly loved the frogs. And when he originally looked at it, he was like, this is, I think the quote that has been attributed to him is like, this is like a fantastical cocktail with incredible like human potential, because there are so many bioactive peptides. And even more recently, there have been papers published where they brought back samples from the jungle, looked at it under microscope, and there's an analysis where they kind of compare the what it looks like to known, and they're like, yep, looks like this, and this looks like this, and this is this. So 27 of them. So imagine combining 27 compound molecules that have all different effects, right? Each of them has a multitude of effects. So when we start looking at what it is and how powerful it is, it's a complex cocktail, essentially. So it has an enormous number of effects. And I think I might have answered your question in there.
right. Yeah. So then, okay. So I interrupted you about the 27. What were you saying that we were, yeah. So the 27 has been shown to be like in our bodies or something that
Right. We have receptors for.
receptors.
So they
Yeah.
either look almost exactly like things that our body is already making. And when we think about these kind of molecules, it's like if it looks alike, it behaves alike, right? And so if it looks alike, it'll fit the key into the lock and then activate a whole slew of changes. So essentially what peptides are signaling molecules. So it signals the body. It doesn't, a lot of times medications will stop something or block something or add something. And what peptides do is they kind of almost turn the key on the body's ability to operate the way it's supposed to, right? To be in balance, to do the things it's supposed to do. For example, speaking of it, just a different peptide, that would be like BPC, that's an injectable peptide, right? It tells the soft tissue to heal itself. And it directs all the things that are supposed to be used to heal to do so. And so that's essentially what peptides do, is they signal. There can be neuropeptides that are signaling and creating signaling within the central nervous system in the brain. And then there are hormone-like peptides as well and they can also operate as both. So they are essentially signalers.
Okay. That's why it feels so okay. Because, I have to say, and I'm sure anybody listening who has worked with a combo, I always feel good afterwards. I mean, I've never, minus sometimes the little puffy frog face, sometimes, not always. I always feel like $1,000,000, it's like, I feel like a reset switch was turned on. I feel energy come back. That's actually one of the most noticeable things I've experienced. And I've always wondered about it. I'm like, how is this working? Is it adding something? Is it doing something? And then there's that purge, the bile purge thing, which I've also never quite understood why it has to be like that. I mean, I guess there's different theories, right? I know there's also people out there practicing kind of slightly different techniques and ways of using it. But yeah, how do you explain the purge? Or is that just like to flush things out with the water and the
Yeah, totally. So I do want to speak to something actually that you just said as well. Just before getting into the purge, Jason has a great way of saying this. And, as I've done an enormous amount of digging into the peptides of combo, I truly believe that this is an accurate way of saying it, is that the energy that you feel, the way you feel afterwards is really, these peptides almost just are that reset button for the body to operate the way it's supposed to. That feeling like $1,000,000 is just
Mm.
how we're supposed to feel. And so it's, this resetting of the nervous system, right? Resetting of the immune system, this just sort of like flipping the switch of like, a good way to sort of maybe compare it to is people will do things like sauna use or cold plunge, right? There's this like a little bit of a shock to the system that hits that reset button so that things can then start working the way that they're supposed to. And I see it very similarly, that all these peptides are sort of like, you like come back. And that's pretty much what is happening. Now, when it comes to the purge is really interesting. There's definitely a belief out there that a purge is a detoxification. And that's one thing that I think is incredibly misunderstood. And it's one of the misunderstandings that probably leads to the greatest potential harm that can come from Kambo, which is where we believe a purge has to happen because we're believing that toxins are being released. So if you come from the mindset that toxins are being released and it's in the purge, then the mindset that you have to get it out kind of, I guess, could make sense, right? But that foundational premise is actually just a misunderstanding. So in order for toxins to be released, right, we store toxins pretty much in our fatty tissue. So that's our visceral fat, heavy metals that are getting stored in our brain, right? So these have to first be mobilized. They have to be released from where they are stored. And then in order for them to get into the purge, which is coming from bile, it has to get through the liver, into the gallbladder, out of the gallbladder, into the stomach, and now out into your bucket. Most people are purging at around like 5 to 7 minutes if they're going to purge. That does not happen that quickly. So what's in your bile is essentially what has been collecting in the gallbladder since your last fatty meal. And the mobilization hasn't happened. There's also not really a mechanism when we look at the peptides. There's not a mechanism for mobilizing, right? When we do any sort of detox, it's mobilization and kind of binding, essentially conjugation, and then excretion. And we're just missing the mobilization piece. And maybe there will be information that comes out in the future about, a new understanding of how a peptide works, but in our current understanding, that's just not what we're seeing. So when it comes to the purge is simply, I'm going to say it's a bug, not a feature, right? So one of the things, actually, there's multiple things happening, but some of the peptides in Kambo are actually causing a lot of stimulation to the GI tract. One of those is actually uh, a stimulation of the gallbladder and the pancreas and the stomach. And so you get an emptying of that gallbladder. The bile coming out of the gallbladder that's coming out right near the stomach. And seems to be a little bit of like a reverse peristalsis, and it ends up in the stomach. Now, we have you drink water to begin with so that if you do end up with all that bile in your stomach, you're now not trying to purge straight bile because that's incredibly uncomfortable and very thick, right? So we want some sort of a substrate in the stomach to allow that bile to come up. Now, another thing that's happening is one of the peptides is actually kind of tickling a part of the brain that is considered called the chemoreceptor trigger zone. Now, this is something in the brain that's like when it senses that something is a little bit amiss, it's like, hey, you should probably get this out. And so it senses these changes happening in the body, and it's like, not really sure about this. Let's probably just try and get it out. So the purging is either just this intense nausea from having bile in the stomach, right? Or this tickling of the chemoreceptor trigger zone in the brain. And that's usually what brings on the purge. It's not a necessity, right? Because whatever is in that bile was going to come out anyway. It was going to come out the next time you went to the bathroom, right? The next time you had a fatty meal, the gallbladder would have contracted, started releasing that bile to bind up to the fat and start breaking it down. And then it would travel through your intestines and come out. So it's going to come out one way or the other. And so if it doesn't come out through your mouth in a purge, it will come out the next time you go to the bathroom. So that's kind of this misunderstanding of the purge. Now, in saying that, I don't want to discount the power of an energetic purge, right? And so, yes, Kambo is like this incredible, concoction of peptides and science and cool stuff. But there is this other more energetic aspect to it that I don't want to discount. But I always go back when I'm talking to somebody about this, or I have somebody in front of me, we're working with Kambo. Whether or not you have something to release from an energetic perspective is totally between you and the frog, right? If it is meant to come out, and it will come out. And I fully trust the frog and the work that it's doing with you to allow for that if it is if it is what's needed. So there's nothing that's, I don't need you to drink a ton of water to create this purge. We can just let it allow it, right? We allow what is to come up to come up. And if that means nothing, if that means you end up tearing up and crying, if that means you end up like shaking and shivering, or maybe that means you sit in incredible discomfort for the next,
Like me.
yeah, that's,
Lay
you know
on
what
the
I'm talking
floor.
about.
Ah, no.
Yeah, maybe that means you're just really uncomfortable for the next, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes. Then that may be what it is also. And there's beauty and power in all of that. And in my perspective, there's nothing I need to do to get in the way of the work that the frog is doing energetically with you.
Wow. So good. I have to say, I've done Kambo with Sarah a few times, and she was the first person I've worked with. And, the other people I worked with were like trained and, had a background or medicine people. But Sarah, because I think your background as a nurse, working in the actual medical field at one point in your career, you were like timing it, like it was really nice to be held in like such a professional manner of like very methodical and like kind of in that science of like, okay, here's the proper amount of time to actually leave it on, get the full benefits. And it was really good. And yeah, it's always a fascinating experience. And I think there's just so much mystery around it for so many people, but I'm so glad that you've studied it and you're out here talking about it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us like have heard little bits and pieces about the peptides, and I'm sure hopefully there's more studies being done. But we all know like, wow, that felt good, or that worked, or, that healed XYZ. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm curious, do you have a lot of clients that come to you for energy and fatigue? Is Kambo something that comes up for all of them? Like, hey, this might be something you want to try, or are there certain people that shouldn't even do Kambo?
Certainly. There are certain conditions that will exclude somebody, right? If you've ever had a heart attack, if you've ever had a stroke, if you have the other big one is like Marfan's or Ehlers-Danlos, right? And the way I sort of view Kambo, I think that Kambo is very, very powerful. Um, but I think that we need to sort of look at the whole picture. So for example, for somebody who has Lyme, right? Or mold, these I think are really, really powerful, but I think we have to be so careful because, you know, one of the things that Kambo has are like these 9 different peptides that are all antimicrobial, and they're such powerful antimicrobials that we need to be really careful with them. So, if I'm going to work with somebody, I want to make sure first, especially if we suspect some sort of chronic infection, we want to kind of make sure that your detox pathways are working well, that your liver is well supported, and that you have the things that you need to be able to process the metabolites of breaking down that bacteria, right? So I see it as an important and really powerful tool, but I also see it as one that I put together in part of like a grander plan. And it's not always right for everybody. Right. I've certainly spoken to people who were in the middle of a fertility journey, and they were working with a fertility doctor, and they were on injections. And I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of things that are happening within with your hormones, right? And coming from your adrenal glands, and also sort of prolactin. We know there's, a little bit of an increase in with like prolactin during this. And so like we need to like step back and allow a process to happen, and let's come to Kambo afterwards, because somebody's usually paying a lot of money for some of these treatments, right? And so allowing that to complete and then kind of working with it. So there's certainly times where and I always come from the perspective of, let me find all the reasons I shouldn't do this, right? When there is risk involved with something, let me find all the reasons I shouldn't. And if I can't find a reason that I shouldn't, then let's move forward. But another thing I kind of want to bring up around like Kambo and a lot of the concerns that people have, or stories that they may have heard, is this idea of, kind of going in and they throw like 5 points on you, right? Or a ton of medicine on you, or a ton of discretion on you, right? And it's also, if you're, depending on where you are, maybe we start, but we start really small, We build a relationship with the medicine. We see how your body responds. And I find that people will have incredible benefit from smaller amounts. So it's put it into the big picture. Is it right for you at all? Is it right for you right now? Is your body supported to be able to handle it? And then how are we going to work with it? And my general approach is gentle. Like one of the things I think that we have this mindset is that, especially when you've been sick for a long time, right? You're like, all right, I'm ready. I'm going to get this thing. I'm going to heal this body. And it's like, go at it. I'm going to, as my own mindset was, I'm going to beat this thing into submission. And that is so far from the approach that I think we need to be taking with our body. Is gentle. Kambo can be gentle, right? We can work gently with it. We can develop a new relationship with the body where it's like, how can we lovingly hold this thing so that it can heal versus going at it and trying to warrior our way through this thing with Kambo. Rather, let's build a relationship. And sometimes it is right to go in with a bigger dose, but let's build a relationship first. So you and the medicine you and the secretion have an understanding, and we're not going to shock your system by putting it through this really intense experience.
So glad you say that. I know, because I've met people who are going in for the first time and they have like 10 dots all over them. I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, there's, it's like the Wild West in this kind of in the whole medicine world and the psychedelic space. There's a lot of, anything goes, people who are like bigger is better, and I'm glad you said that. Like if you're starting out, maybe, start out small. It's not the last time you have to do it, and just build a relationship, see how you respond. And, we will say there have been deaths from this medicine. Not I think we only know, I don't know what the statistic is. I wouldn't say it's like super up there in the high risk, but it's true. There have been people who died, which, there's people that die from crossing a street as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think that that's where, particularly working with somebody who has been well trained becomes really important. And unfortunately, a lot of the deaths are, caused by hyponatremia. And that usually is where they're using it within the confines of like an ayahuasca retreat where people are not taking in any salts. And then you add in the belief that you have to get this stuff out of you, right? This idea that the purge is a toxin release. And so then you have a ton of water being consumed in a short period of time. Plus, you already don't have very much sodium on board. And that creates hyponatremia. And that's how a lot of the deaths end up happening. So working with somebody who's well trained, I'm a massive fan of Tribal Detox. Their training is absolutely top notch, in my
yeah.
opinion.
And you've written one of them. No, it's funny because I, the people I work with in Peru are like very purists. Like, what do you need that stuff for? Is kind of their reaction. Like, you don't need that. So sometimes when I hear of these retreats that have like 5 different medicines in 3 days, it's like, why? Like, that just seems like so much sometimes, and it's like, I don't know if our world, especially with the world that we're in today and the energies and just the pace that our life is going, I don't know if bigger is always better. It's like maybe the opposite effect.